Okay, our next speaker is R.J. Brison, talking about the versatile honey locust. We're hitting all the nut trees in this session. R.J. grew up in the farm country of southeastern Pennsylvania. He's worked as a diesel mechanic, a vegetable grower, an orchardist, and a nurseryman. And he's currently working at Trees for Graziers, helping to develop working knowledge of fruit, nut, timber, and fodder species. This is his first presentation at a conference. So let's give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hello. Yep, so bear with me. Get through it. So I work for Trees for Graziers. A big species of focus for us is the honey locust. It's a familiar tree for a lot of folks, and around town here, you probably saw it sticking out of sidewalks. That's where it's most common as a shade tree. But it has many other uses, which we're utilizing. So for silvopasture, our focus is the shade aspect, similar to sidewalk plantings. The pod production, it drops a pod filled with a sugary substance, which you've probably seen. It has high feed potential, sugar, of course, protein, different analyses. And then even the dappled shade and just its general leaf structure lands you right at that 30% range, which is great for your common forages. For going outside of silvopasture, it's great for wildlife plantings. Most any animal you'll find here and there seems to love it for sugar aspects, and it's interesting because I don't know if folks here are seeing it, but we're seeing a lot more attention towards wildlife plantings and food plots gear up, especially in nursery demand. And so, as much as planting the honey locust for the cow, guys are wanting to plant it for the deer, and that's a real thing. And then insects. So that is a bisected honey locust moth. It is hosted by solely the honey locust and the Kentucky coffee tree. So it's a great use of it there. So to rewind here, my title was a little bit misleading. So I'm going to get into propagation more so, and that's focusing on root cutting of honey locust. Because for these practices, the question comes up: how do we make more honey locust efficiently and whatnot? So there's on the market now a lot of grafted honey locust. That's kind of the predominant method, and that's how a lot of the ornamental varieties have been propagated. But if you're planting on a pasture, say, you can't control when a cow wants to bump into a graft, and then that farmer's out of a tree. Or you swing the bush hog too wide, and then you're out of a tree. So I've been looking at clonal methods that avoid grafting. So that's softwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings, tissue culture, and root cuttings. Root cuttings came up especially because if you look back to when the TVA was putting a lot of effort into this, that's Tennessee Valley Authority, John Hershey, tree crops era, if that's 30s and 40s. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. They kind of came to the conclusion that for cost-effective production of clonal material at scale, root cuttings seemed really promising. Now, that was before a big era of tissue culture, so things are changing, but I have a goal of trying to keep propagation as simple and accessible in all ways. And if there's a species that we're looking to propagate, I'd rather try every propagation method and get a procedure for all of them and then dial in what we need for production numbers. So right now it's developing methods for root cuttings. And so some advantages of root cuttings: it's clonal material. It's far faster than grafting because you're just taking a piece of root in the ground, growing it, or in a pot. Simple. It's that simple. And then a big one for us is the potential for exponential propagation material, and it's a model that was put forth when they were doing this previous research where if you're able to produce the tree's bare root, you can then trim those roots and 10x. They were finding up to 10 rootling pieces off of one bare root tree, and then you save those, and so on and so forth. So that makes it cost effective production. Root cuttings do have their negatives. So big hurdle here is all these named varieties that have been pursued need to be own rooted first. Grafted material you can't do it with. So that's going to be a huge obstacle. Stock plants available, and by that I mean you need those plants to harvest your roots from. So you're either holding a lot of those in a permanent propagation planting, or you're relying on that bare root rollover when you're digging. It can be labor intensive to gather. There's ways to make that more efficient, but that's just going to take time and development. And then a big one, if you think of a sprout coming from a root cutting, and I'll have pictures. The sprouting root shoot junction might not be the best form compared to a graft when it's a much more linear healing growth pattern and whatnot. So what could be better than root cuttings? And this is keeping in mind that we want material cost effective and not grafted because of that cow going out of line or a bush hog swinging wide. So really focusing on clonal own rooted material. Hardwood cuttings can take advantage of your prunings and the seasonality, but it's a little material intensive. So that can be an option, but softwood cuttings are taking development, but I think of softwood cuttings much more as a way to get to your root cuttings. It still kind of binds you to a greenhouse or some sort of setup like that. And then tissue culture is a whole nother can of worms. And it's very much worth pursuing, but the root cutting methods are simple and accessible at many levels. So in getting the material own rooted, a large obstacle that we've been finding is the juvenility of the root. That can change your statistics of sprouting big time. And so here's just a little illustration about juvenility. So we're focusing on that material there to have higher rates of success in popping, but as we chase trees that look promising, it might be more realistic to get into this material for the characteristics that you're observing. So strategies to revert back, reintroduce that juvenility are going to be a large focus. One that's seeming really promising are the epicormic shoots here, and taking hardwood cuttings and having that in an environment where that sprout does come off. There has been success with other species in that way, so I'm hoping we can get roots that way. So to speak to that point, there's the cone of juvenility here, and so that's just pointing out that the earliest parts of the tree retain those juvenile characteristics. And I don't know, full disclosure, I don't know the full picture of the cone of juvenility underground. So this paper here is from the 30s, and they were finding that root cuttings from mature trees don't sprout nowhere near as well as ones from young seedlings, when we were able to find that as well. So it might be a varietal thing. I'm thinking it might be that cone of juvenility has some mirroring underground, and so that's an obstacle we're kind of facing. But to get into the root cuttings themselves and what that's looking like, so we're getting to targeted trees while they're dormant, thinking that the roots are dormant then, and it's kind of treating it similar to above ground. I can see that being questionable because we have stretched the season a little bit and other folks have, and so the dormancy window might be a little wider. You can, if you're digging in the fall, you can harvest those roots then and overwinter them, and that's some work that was done firstly with persimmons and sealing those with some sort of wax or tree coat and in sand, and then the roots store pretty nicely. So all different systems to kind of see what's viable. While you're gathering, you want to maintain your proximal and distal ends, so the piece of the root closest to the tree and that going away, just by nature of how it's going to sprout. It's going to sprout from the proximal end, and then you get better form. And I was finding to leave them as whole as possible until you're sticking them. Just it was helping to mitigate rot, and it was easier to preserve them. And so when you are going to stick the roots, and we did into the bare ground, but we've also had success in pots. So just any media that you're working with and what kind of product you're wanting to come out with. We're cutting them into 3 to 5 inch long pieces with 1/4 to 1 inch diameter. I was finding pencil to thumb, very quick guidelines. So yeah, that pencil to thumb diameter. And then making your cuts when you're taking that big piece of root and breaking it down, proximal being flat, and that's your surface, and then just putting a slant cut on your distal end, and then it's very easy for you or anyone planting to roll with that. So I've talked with some folks that have success with root cuttings and fungicide. We haven't done it. As others have noted, there's some mycorrhizal loss in obviously using fungicide and establishment and whatnot. So I'm not opposed to it, but it's just something we haven't done. And so we're sticking that in with the end just below the surface or flush, and then we were seeing shoot emergence outdoors in the field at 55 degrees soil temp. In a greenhouse, you're going to be able to cheat that and get a little better pop. So some things that came up, and that's just going to take more development and playing with this system, are the shoots when they emerge, especially in the field, more so. Some seem to be more tender than others, and so some would cook and some wouldn't. Let's see. I'm running out of time here.
You're right.
So yeah. Okay, so pictures. I'm better at pictures. We all like pictures. I like pictures. Holy cow. So processing station. So just we're playing with procedures and trying to make root cuttings see the protocols in the nursery and for production. So just trying a different grade system, and maybe some would go in the field and some would end up in the greenhouse or whatnot.
What are we looking at right there, RJ?
Yeah, so those are honey locust roots and some tools to mess with them, of course. And then, so here, it's very scientific, but that pocket knife is 4.5 inches long. So these were all stuck in the ground early March, and so we're in zone 7A. It's very different than up here, I'm sure. But that's on June 5th. We're having good sprouts come up. And that's early enough in the season, I feel confident we could end up with a tree out of that. And so there's that pattern of multiple sprouting. And so those shoots might get cooked, and that one might survive. If they all survive, you're going back through and cleaning those and narrowing them down. And that's just something that would have to come out in your protocols. Okay, so once again, 4.5 inches here, and so that's on July 10th. And so we're at the, not peak, but earlier part of our growing season, and things are heating up, and so that's turned into a nice tree, and that's, so there, it's erratic growth that does appear, but you get kind of a range, and so that's towards the end of July there. And same conditions, and so that's 1.5 feet of growth, and that's clonal material, once again, that's from that root, so it's bypassing other methods. So this is bare roots dug. They are budded out. They weren't for sale. It's just to final out the project. But so that's the one season, no irrigation, full sun, and just weed control. And you can see the original piece of root there. So that 3 to 5 inch piece, and then that shoot was able to harden off and turn into a tree and kind of get a bare root looking thing. But to notion towards that root shoot junction that I mentioned, I don't like that. I like grafting because it's very linear, but how can we mitigate that? Or is it more time in the nursery for that to fill out? That's just something that's going to have to come out of the wash. So this is the field where it all happened. You can see all these different little flags. So that was just marking where shoots were coming up because it was very erratic timing. But they were planted in rows. It was very similar to potatoes almost, where just rip a furrow, throw roots in, well, stick them in with maintaining your, and then weed control. And so that's, yeah. We did do other species, so this was about honey locust, but more about root cuttings, and that's just the wrong title, I guess. But so we did mulberry, Osage orange, poplar, American persimmon, and black locust. And the biggest one there, black locust, everyone seems to know that comes from root cutting pretty nicely. In the nursery trade, staghorn sumac is also very commonly done from root cutting. So we did these species, same methodology, same field conditions, same everything. So just more pictures. So that's American persimmon, and that's in September of the year. So that was stuck in March, and that's a clonal material that is then 2 foot in September. Black locusts, so 6 foot-ish, I guess. And we had some that are over here in the picture somewhere that were 7 foot, 8 foot tall in that one season. And this is no irrigation. I kind of wanted things to die because I wanted to see the limits of the system. So that was pretty impressive for me at least. Poplars, so 2 foot. We have Osage orange there, and that is mulberry. And mulberry sprouting or very shrubby, so there's some pruning and labor added to that. But that's all one season. Everything was stuck in that March, and pretty hard conditions. Containers. So we have done some in containers. These are Osage, and these are American persimmons. And so those are 8. With those, I'm able to use that smaller piece of root in a more controlled environment to make material use efficient. And so they're popping all the same, and that turns into a nice tree that we can use either as an understock or just straight species, or if we accomplish goals of own rooting varieties, it's just another strategy to get clonal material out. And that's it. That's my contact info. Yeah.
Great job. You have a lot of questions. We'll take one, your choice.
Okay.
Honey locust.
Yeah.
Do you have favorite selections? You got a clonally propagated, I assume so.
Yeah, it's a clonal propagation, but I can't say I have. We're so early on, I think, in it, and seeing them. So obviously we have these plantings, large plantings at universities and whatnot, but I think we're just trying to propagate every selection at this point because they're not planted enough places and been observed under. So just the typical ones that you can find.